Well, folks, we are ready to start. So um, I'm going to go ahead and start welcoming everyone, and then we'll get going. Although I know we're still waiting on Andrew. All right. So for those of you who just joined us, welcome. I'm glad you're enjoying the conference so far and that you're participating. We're doing the Our Leadership Development Has No or Limited Edges, Unlimited Edges. We have 4 presentations today. They'll be 15 minutes each. We'll save the Q&A for last. And we'll move through them pretty quickly, so I'm not going to go deeply into who each person is. If they share something about themselves, then they'll do that during the presentation. And we're going to start with Kimberly Leeshock, who's going to do a presentation on Everyone Matters, how one public company transformed their business into a force for good. Kimberly.
Awesome. Thanks, Efley. Can everyone see my screen all right here? We're in good shape. Okay, perfect. Let me just move this so I can see you all and see me at the same, or see my work at the same time. Awesome. So yes, my name is Kim Leeshock, and I am the current Director of Leadership Development for a company called Lippert Components. I did want to put in here just a quick shout out. I would not be sitting in this seat nor in the company in the role that I'm in were it not be for St. Mary's College of California leadership program. I did get my master's degree there in leadership, and I've got a couple of my professors here to cheer me on. So thank you for all that you've done and impacted my life. It's been incredible. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about how one public company transformed their business into a force for good with this concept of everyone matters. And I hope our objective for today, you will be walking away with a clear understanding of LCI's journey to caring about people by focusing on leadership development. And so number one, we'll walk through the context, historical influence, and culture of the organization and system. We'll talk through the content significance, so a shift in our CEO, the leadership perspective that led to a transformational change within our business. And then number 3, structure and design. I'll walk through how we're structured, the programmatic design, roles, success metrics. And number 4 here, outcomes. We'll talk through the corresponding impact on our organization, also the industry at large and our community. How we've transformed our business into a force for good, serving as a catalyst that's shifting so much local culture here in Indiana, but beyond in the manufacturing industry. And so we'll start off with the historical overview. And this is just a little bit about LCI, who we are. We are a leading supplier in highly engineered components, primarily to the manufacturers of RVs, boats, buses, tractor trailer, equestrian. We're a multi-billion-dollar company, have about 12,000 people right now, went down to 3,000 during COVID, and back up in a very short period of time. Not necessarily let them go, but furloughed, excuse me. Mm-hmm. So it's been crazy change even this year. I could probably do a whole presentation just on what we've done this year. But the way I like to talk about our business is most people have no idea we exist. But how many of you have ever seen a school bus on the road or an RV? Okay, yeah. So we supply 99% of all school bus windows in the United States. So you will, if you ever see a school bus, we did the window. And we also supply 90% of all components to every RV that's in the United States as well. So all of the awnings, the furniture, the doors, the mattress, the electronics that open and close, everything. So we're one of the secret sauces to the RV industry, but we also have diversified. And so this is our history. We were started, we're a 3rd generation company. Mr. Lippert started us in 1956. We started acquiring different parts of the business. In 1997, we went public. And then by 2000, we started acquisitions of all the things you see here. And this star, I don't know if you can see this star here, is actually where we started our cultural journey. And so that's where I'm going to be taking us on our journey today, from there until today. And so unlike the rest of the manufacturing industry, which is really caught up to a little bit more of thoughtful compassion with people, the RV industry was really, really far behind. And it was a result of the second industrial revolution here, where mass production was key to success. And so the mindset was produce, 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 churn and burn. If I can make 25 cents more per hour down the road, I'm going to leave the company and do that. And so Lippert, unfortunately, was the biggest and baddest one of them all in the area. And we were actually known as an organization people didn't want to work with. It was very painful to talk to us as a company, whether it be customer service or, but they had to, because we own the majority of components industry in RV. And so this is kind of how it felt. This is an internal comic we use to tell our story and talk about our journey. Overtime hours, quality ratings and safety ratings were very low. There weren't enough people, a lot of people complaining about terrible leadership. And that just doesn't feel good, right? When people are walking into work feeling this way. And so the industry, the RV industry, wasn't changing, but society was changing. And the outdated industrial practices that had once worked were no longer sustainable. And so our CEO, in 2012, learned about another smaller private manufacturing company's transformational journey to caring about their people through this book. I highly recommend it, called Everybody Matters by Bob Chapman. The CEO met him, got to know him really well, recognized his own blind spot. I'm quoting Yen here, Yen's definition of blind spot. And he was able to diagnose the adaptive challenge that Heifetz and Linsky talk about, which is the organizational journey needed to totally shift. And it began with a dramatic change of his heart and his mind. And he decided, after learning this and seeing what could be, that team members who are treated well like coming to work and are actually more productive. And so this was the vision. We wanted people loving their jobs, because it also improves all these other things. But we wanted people to leave happier and healthier headed home, because that ultimately impacts the system, which means home life, community life, and the larger ecosystem. So here's our cultural journey. We started in 2012. That's when Jason committed to the leadership and culture journey. He realized there was a better way to do business and still make a profit. And so ultimately he realized, well, there's also a blind spot here. I don't know how to do this. So he hired a leadership development coach internally to mold the culture, which then they changed the company language from employee to team member, from boss to leader, from supervisor to team lead. And we began tracking attrition to measure our commitment to creating a better place to work. And it started at 120% attrition in 2013. So we were losing more people than we were keeping. We began, the CEO began conducting listening sessions at that same time. And he very much realized, as Marcus Aurelius would say, what stood in the way became the way. So the listening sessions really brought forth that our 19th century orientation to leadership really needed to transform into 21st century leadership, increasing retention and also profit at the same time. That he wanted to make it possible. He wanted to show that it was possible. So the next phase of our cultural journey, 2014 to 2017, we made some considerable investments with his newfound commitment to caring about people. And our CEO launched what we call the Everyone Matters initiative, seeing the team, as Heifetz would say, the individual, the system, the individual, the team, and the organization as a full system, and everyone matters in the system, both individually as a team and at large. And so we made capital investments to update the bathrooms. These are things that he heard in the listening sessions. Updated the break rooms, air quality, AC, HVAC systems, parking lots, just small things, but really made a huge difference in how people were showing up to work. We also went through a journey. Our executive team practiced authentic collaboration through developing core values, leader qualities, a mission, vision, statement to guide our identity and behaviors. He continued these listening sessions among these 3 years, and he just had his 100th listening session this past year. He continues to do this every week. This is something he does now forever. And ultimately, and what I love about this, and it was something that I had learned in graduate school as well, he advocated for localized leadership to act on the cultural needs. So shifting from hierarchical authority definition of leadership to leadership as influence, which can be enacted at any level of the system. So that's from Delos Parks's work. This idea of post-heroic leadership became the focus. And so we were practicing or exercising power with rather than power over, and primarily growing people rather than simply just doing work at the end of the day, and focused our efforts on celebrating and recognizing people. And so that internal reflection turned into an external reflection of we want to change how we show up to the rest of the world. And so we committed to 100,000 hours of community service as a company, and achieved that goal. Started in 2017 and they achieved it in 2017. And I will say that is done internally by our team members as well. And so I won't walk through all of this, but so our leadership and culture journey kind of exponentially grew over the last 3 or 4 years. And I would say the 2 key critical factors for the reason of success was this that they invested in a complete leadership and culture development team. And so they recognized that we needed more mirrors across the company internally to help our leaders see themselves in their work with more clarity, to both support and hold those leaders' feet to the fire to grow where they feel like they might have blind spots, uncover blind spots if they don't know about the blind spots, or areas of growth, and examine failures as well as successes. And then also practice this coaching mindset that could then we coach the leaders who then can become coaches to their team members, which actually Ken Otter, who's on here, he wrote a whole thing about managers as coaches and how effective that can be, becomes much more sustainable. And so we are now a team consisting of almost 16 leadership development coaches and personal development coaches within our organization. And the CEO decided that he needed to just develop that intentional structure to build leadership capacity. And so I will mention, we are not HR. We actually report different out of HR. We are our own function, reports into operations, because we feel like that's where the rubber meets the road, and it brings a different level of trust. We also have a very high level of a relationship with HR in order to, we call them triads. So 1 personal and professional development coach, 1 leadership development director, and our HR directors all work together by division. And it's so important, because if something then pivots that is no longer coachable and it's now an HR conversation, they're right there ready to come on in. We also developed a leadership and culture playbook, which essentially is the X's and O's of how to develop a culture when one doesn't exist or it's painful. And so as we've acquired additional companies and also taken on new locations across the globe, ultimately, this has become a secret sauce to our success when we are trying to practice our cultural integration activities. And so anytime we acquire a company, there's a new coach assigned to that acquisition and walks through to make sure that the culture is ingrained as just as much as our business practices are. So the structure and design of our team is, the structure and design of our program and the roles and the success metrics of our specific leadership and culture development team I'll talk through. But some of the key things that we'd walk away with here, we've created that LCI vision, which is to be a business that is a force for good in the world. And our mission is to make lives better by developing meaningful relationships with the people around us. And this is that Everyone Matters initiative that I talked about, our cultural strategy. This is plastered everywhere, signage, everything. But I will mention, it's not just plastered on the wall. It's ingrained in the hearts and minds of every person. And it's living this mindset has really become the way of life. These are our core values and leader qualities that we have come up with. And again, it's not just a lanyard that we put on our badges, but it's really become living and breathing. And I'll talk a little bit about, we actually have trainings for every single one of these core values and leader qualities. And that's where we started, was the practical application of these for our leadership. and then it's developed over time. And so I probably won't have enough time to get super detailed about that, but the journey has been really neat to watch. So our team, we're going to just focus for a minute here. In 2020, what is our focus and our structure today? So we've gone through this crazy journey. Attrition was crazy. Now what do we focus on? And our three top focuses right now are high performance leadership development coaching, training, and personal and professional growth, as well as our community impact. And so as many of you know who work in the world of leadership development, we've got to plant the seeds until the soil, plant the seeds until the soil. And oftentimes you don't see the fruit until year 5, where all of a sudden the bamboo shoot grows about 80 feet. And before you know it, you've got a whole family of bamboo. One of the things that a lot of us have felt over the last couple of years, it's like, well, we see it happening over here in this part of the world, or we see it happening over in this division. Why aren't we feeling it here? And it's like, well, you know, we as a leadership and culture development team can only do so much, but what we are doing is building strong, sustainable roots critical to the system. And so while you can't see it, and it's really hard to measure the efforts that we're doing, it leads to business growth and development, which is what most people value and see, and also this larger business impact as a force for good. And so this is how we framed up our 2020 vision for this year. Ironically, at the same exact time and in a leadership moment to share, our chief sales officer actually had a very similar meeting a week after we had created this concept of the bamboo and how important it is to till the soil, and it takes a long time. And he actually sent this message to his people. It's real simple, gang. If we don't help people develop personally and professionally and develop people into leaders that align with our own standards, there's no hope. And we will never experience the fruit. And so I thought this was so interesting. What we ended up doing was taking some of his language and superimposing it on the image we created. He had never had a leadership coach until a couple of years prior, and he personally has developed and starting these light bulb moments are just crazy how the synergy within our teams and this mindset and heart set of our senior most leaders is common. So it's actually, they've self-selected out if they don't align with our mission. We also launched our leadership development model this year, which this is something we've been talking about but hadn't really visualized. I like to joke that we are an entrepreneurial startup in a multi-billion-dollar company skin, and so we do a lot of iteration. This is the concept that leading self, we did some research, I should mention, internally on what do the most successful LCI leaders have within them to be successful, and they lead themselves really well, they lead their teams really well, and they lead their businesses really well. We also have this fleshed out by what does that actually mean under each of these, but at the core is our core values and leader qualities. This is, oh, okay. This is our structure right now, and we've got 5 different teams underneath us, a team of 20 professionals. Everything that we train on is science-based and performance management. And this is our team leadership development as trainer, coach, and trusted advisor, our focus. Here are our success metrics, attrition, retention, some of these things. We also have internal metrics that we track, all sorts of data to prove, because while we're a public company, we want to show, regardless of leadership, who our impact. And so just high level impact so far, our attrition rate in just 6 years has dropped from 120% to 30%. We're now at a 28% attrition. And with this focus on retention, everything has improved. And so engagement, we are now above average in our engagement scores in manufacturing. So if we were to compare to RV, very different. Our acts of service here, more than 350,000 hours of volunteering in the community. We've actually started an academy for leadership externally facing to help our competitors grow in this area so that we can all be better as a system. Our stock has performed. You can see the star there is where we've grown. Our acquisitions have grown. I mean, it's everything from our journey has improved, and the impact of our training. I won't get into all of this because there's so much information here, but overall, I hope you were able to walk through with some of our information today that was enlightening for you. How did we manage transformational change and still profit? It was a change of a heart, change in mindset, and a change of approach to practicing leadership. And with that self-discipline to get the results, it's really actually happened. And so just because I know there's a little bit of an academic in me, here are my references I referenced. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Kimberly. I appreciate it. All right. So we're going to move right into the next presentation, which is the Prometheus project, creating a framework for navigating the meta problem of leadership development. This will be Jonathan Reams and Thomas Bohentz. All right, go for it, folks.
Okay. So thanks for that, Kimberly. As I was listening, I was thinking of all the ways that I could link to what you have been telling us. And a lot of that, in my experience, comes down to it's a journey to build this kind of culture. We all start somewhere and we want to improve in some way. And one of the big advantages I think that your organization and you had is good teachers and mentors like Marguerite and Ken there, and a surrounding environment like St. Mary's, where this kind of thing can really enable you to sort through things in a good way. But many people, when they start out on the journey, this is what they're doing. There's all sorts of pop psychology books on leadership, models to do the best rest, and you end up through it. And you don't really know, how do you find the gold in the garbage? And so that kind of question, and how to support people like yourself and others at any part of an organization, or academics, teachers, students, to find their way through that, has been part of our quest. And so the Prometheus project is really something that Tom's big, hairy, audacious idea, and he's recruited a growing number of us. And we started out with this almost 2 years ago now. And Tom, maybe just tell a little bit about how we started building this model. You got to unmute yourself too.
I do. Okay, yes. So we have this belief that leadership should be approachable and understandable, and that we should all be complementing and sharing this same story to our constituents. And we shouldn't make our constituents have a PhD in order to understand what we're talking about. So we said, let's take this on and let's try to go through, get the right diverse group of people together with deep experience in leadership and development, and start to come up with something that's more cohesive, that's helpful to us and helpful to others. And so imagine, real quickly, just imagine yourself searching through everything you can find online, creating all kinds of sticky pads, speaking to experts, tapping into your own partners in your own psyche, going through all the research possible, making sticky pads for everything there is to learn about leadership. And that's what you end up with. It's impossible to digest for most of us, and just unthinkable to even imagine for most of our constituents. Then you're left with this sense of, think of your bosses, right, or your customers, and they've got 5 minutes that day to think about leadership development. And so if you haven't got it focused down, and you're not enabling them, you're burdening them with trying to figure out what we as a profession should figure out together. And I think come up with a consistent voice. I'm not talking about policing language and being very rigid, but we really ought to have, I think, more cohesion and more approachability than exists typically today. We shouldn't make people hunt through the conveyor.
So one of the ideas that has emerged in this is aligned with, I know there's an initiative within the ILA, and this is certainly something that people like Barbara Kellerman have talked about. How do we professionalize leadership? And to do that, we need some sense of this, how do we address this dilemma? What Tom was saying, you know, how can any student of leadership, middle manager, L&D specialist, CLO, plot a pathway through that landscape? So this is the kind of dilemma, and we thought, how can we create essentially a meta framework to support navigation, right? So we initiated a cross-disciplinary research team. We had various people from around the world that we kind of picked and engaged in kind of both tight circles and looser circles, and an iterative process that went on for quite a while. And our research question really was, what would a proof of concept look like for a framework that could help all stakeholders together navigate the complex topics of leaders and leading? So this was our, let's say it's like a big, hairy, audacious idea. Who are we to start off doing this? But, it's like you say too, who else is going to do it if you don't do it?
We'll meet the others on the way as part of it, right?
Yeah.
So we followed a grounded theory type of approach, but so we're not going to tell you the details of all that stuff, but really it's this process of taking that whole wall of Post-its and starting to make sense out of them, and to do that in an iterative process, and to work very closely with each other to examine what our thinking is, what our assumption is, and get it more clear as we go. And then pretty soon we start to organize themes and stuff like that, and we deep into them. And then, beyond that, then we start to see emerging some patterns. And so we'll sometimes all of a sudden you can start to see a pattern. Okay, all of these things that we're finding in the body of knowledge of leadership and leadership development are really talking about these things. And we find a lot of language, for example, that it's a natural thing. We're not criticizing it, that it's easy to come up with 10 ways to say thank you, for example, because we're all coming from different disciplines and different backgrounds. And while that's healthy and normal, it's, we think, not sufficient. How do we cut through that and come up with the common ground that we would like to have enough of, so that we can partner and we can leverage one another, and we can make this an easier journey for transforming our organizations and our cultures, our societies?
So what did we come up with? So all this was just to tell you a little bit about what we did, but now we want to say, what did we come up with? So after, I think really there was 6 to 9 months of really dedicated work. And so we came up with a framework that has what we talk about as both vertical and horizontal consistency. And we're going to talk about 2 different levels of it, even though there's more kind of that we see involved, 35 different elements, but they're kind of aligned into 2 main categories with 6 broad domains in the first level. The next level, we found 29 major subjects within those 6 domains. And then the third level, which we're really not trying to flesh out, but just provide examples of, is what are the more domain specific or language specific or theory specific people ways talk about those higher order constructs. And so in a way, we're trying to say, what's the most general way we can talk about this that everybody would kind of accept in common language? What are some more specific things within that we see emerging? And then how do we drill down into how specific things fit within that? And in terms of our process, we're really, a little past version 1.1. Now we have a published paper that I'll put in the chat window, a link to it a little bit later. And in that paper, then you'll see there's 28 pages and tons of references and the framework listed in detail and the method described and all these good things. But really, we just say we got to a place where we could land and park. And now this is part of the initiative to expand our circle of conversation and start talking with more people and kind of road testing. Does this make sense to people? Does it provide help for people in making useful distinctions in different areas? Does it help them orient it all? So now we'll get a little bit into describing what we came up with.
Yes, is this me, Jonathan? I'm sorry. Must be because you're drinking water. Yeah, and we're very humble about the language. We worked really hard at finding ways, but what we found is everyone we have this conversation with, it takes a while because everyone has their favorite language and their favorite way that they've made sense out of leading. And so some people will struggle with that more, but this is the path I think we need to follow. So really, of these 35 constructs, the most general conceptualization of the most abstract is simply taking some of the things that we want to develop are about the inner capacities or the capacities of the leader, developing the person. We heard a lot of that from Kimberly today. Some of it is about developing the skills of the leader so that they are good at leading. So it's the person doing the leading. And we, of all those power post-its, that we had a couple ways, and we had to choose what's the right way to make the biggest organizing structure of them. And we decided to organize them based as developmental outcomes or learning outcomes. So affective learning on the leader side, cognitive and behavioral learning on the skills side. And so it's that simple. So in the bottom of a sentence, to put it in a sentence, we want to bring our whole human capacities to our well-chosen actions of a leader. And that's at the highest conceptual level what the framework opens up. Really quickly, because we don't have time, what we find is just this simple statement, when we engage people about their practices and their thinking, causes a lot of thinking and a lot of discussion about, you know, what they're doing now and what they're meeting now, what their programs cover and don't cover. So we think there's value just in even this simple division at these two levels.
And yet it gets more.
Yeah. Is this me too? I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, it is. So on the capacities of the leader, or who the leader is, so we just came up with this three dimensions. And it's not that we're inventing or proposing this as our theory. This is our synthesis of what we think the leadership community has defined already. It just, they haven't talked about it necessarily in a synthetic way. And so the capacity to be is really the self, or my own inner experience, my own capacity to process my own experience, my self-awareness and my consciousness. The capacity to know is cognitive capabilities. The capacity to love was our boldest, bravest use of language, but this is about the leader who is committed to something outside of themselves, whether it's their team, whether it's their principles, all of those things make up the capacity to love. And a leader who doesn't have a sense of who they are, a leader who can't deal with the complexity of the situation that they're in, or a leader who isn't committed to something outside themselves, doesn't have all those three legs of the inner capacities of the leader. One other thing, yes, these are all interrelated, but they also, in our constructs, it reflects this idea of adult development, and it reflects this idea of cognitive complexity and cognitive development. It's all built into the lower levels of these constructs. So, sorry if I'm rushing. So then on the other side, the adaptive behavior side, or what are the skills of leading? So we have the X and Y, and obviously there's a Z, but the X and Y are really the context that we find leaders in. So we said leading, what you need to do as a leader and the skills that you need in a leader are very context specific. And there's two broad categories of context. There's the people that we're engaging, and then there's the work or the challenges that we're engaging. So people in the lower levels gets broken out as the scope and complexity of the organization that we're dealing with, all the way from one-on-one engagement as a leader to large global organizations, communications, or our civic society in the most complex end. The challenges, the work challenges, we've defined as 4 archetypal situations where leading is actually a different sets of skills, or at least there's something unique about each one. So for example, leading in a crisis requires a little more directive leadership capability, a little more traditional leadership capability than leading in a highly creative organization or situation where you want to open up everyone's participation and bring a lot of people together who haven't been together before and bring new ideas. Those are different leadership capacities and skills. And then finally, in the thing is, one of the things we observed is we didn't see a lot of strong messaging in the body of knowledge about what exactly leadership was. We had styles of leadership and models of leadership, but we thought it was helpful to say, when we're talking about the process of leading or the act of leading, what are we talking about? And so like you take Cotter's Change, we went through another guy, we took an anthropologist from Yale who studied how communities collectively manage raising chickens in the Mayan jungle. And he broke that down into these very distinct sets of, these are the things that they do to lead collectively. And, you know, kind of the combination of some of those sources turned into a very, very simple 5-part cycle we call the leadership cycle, or the Z cycle, which you'll all recognize. Actually, it's things like setting a vision. It's things like bringing together collective commitment to that vision, taking action to bring it to reality, but it's also attending to the needs of the community that you're in or the people that you're working in.
So, and this is then kind of the more rich level of this, where you can see within each of the 6, the 29 kind of second level categories and how they fit together. And those are in bold, and in the other parts are just little examples of constructs and capacities and skills that we imagined there. And so I will put the paper and a link in the chat room. We're basically here and we're inviting people into a community. So we're really trying to be curious learners, have humble exploration, find some common ground, and enable influence and impact. And so if you look up the Prometheus Project or We Lead Global, we have a community there where we can invite you to kind of join the conversation and process around this.
And we are not a commercial organization. We're not a consultancy. We're not providing services. This is literally an industry collaboration.
All right. Thank you very much, folks. Wonderful, wonderful. All right. So we're going to move right into the next one. This will be highlighting the program evaluation and assessment of the Leadership Trainer Certification Program, presented by Jonathan Kroll and Cameron C. Beatty. Take it away, folks.
Greetings, everyone. Thanks for spending your time with us this afternoon, evening, morning, depending on your time zone. So John and I want to share some highlights of a program evaluation of the first round of a Train the Trainer certificate program, and we want to highlight some of our outcomes here. Cameron Beatty, I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm at Florida State University, where I get to do research with the Leadership Learning Research Center and teach in our undergraduate leadership studies program. And we also have a higher education graduate program that I teach in the College of Education.
And hello, everybody. Jonathan Kroll, he, him, his pronouns as well. And I'm a lecturer and the acting director of academic programs at the University of Rhode Island. And I'm so glad to be with you.
So I get the opportunity to serve on the executive board, the board for the Leadership Training Certificate Program, the nonprofit organization Lead Air that designed and implemented the program. And John is our wonderful executive director of that particular program. So the presentation today, we want to highlight the background. So what is LTCP? Give you some understanding of what we're doing with our Train the Trainer program, highlight some of the key goals of the program and the evolution of our program, highlight the assessment that we did from our participants and some key findings, and then some implications that we might have that I think can grow and imply some things for other Train the Trainer programs centering leadership.
So let me share a little bit about the evolution. I founded the nonprofit organization of which the Leadership Trainer Certification Program is the flagship experience. And it is designed as a train the trainer leadership training experience that prepares participants to effectively facilitate the leadership development of others. And the reason that we started with this program as our flagship is the organization was founded to provide intentional leadership training and development opportunities in Nicaragua, which is the second poorest country in the hemisphere. I've been serving as a volunteer leadership educator there since 2005, and a decade after starting doing independent work, I founded the nonprofit organization to provide intentional leadership training and development. This program was designed for nonprofit leaders on the ground in Nicaragua, in the northwest city of Leon, who were attempting to provide leadership development and leadership training opportunities for their constituents, teachers in a rural school network, youth educators, nonprofit leaders that work with women entrepreneurs. And so they were recognizing that as part of their vision and mission as an organization, they wanted to serve as the leadership development operator for their constituents, their community, and they just didn't have the staff who had the knowledge base or the skill set to facilitate trainings. And so based on intentional conversations over a decade with nonprofit leaders, it made sense to start with this program. We held a fantastic pilot in the summer of 2017, but due to the political and social unrest in Nicaragua in 2018, it just became unsafe and untenable to continue our work there. And in short, over a 6-month period from April 2018 onwards, the government has killed over 350 peaceful protesters, mostly young people, that just caused us to not operate there. Coming back to the United States, we had intentional conversations amongst our board as to what we can and what we ought to be doing. And we decided to restructure the Leadership Trainer Certification Program for audiences in this country, namely university administrators, student affairs educators, and nonprofit leaders. And the data that we'll be sharing from this evaluation, this assessment, is from the pilot program that we held with that community. So we can slide into the learning outcomes of the program, and we've got 3 of them. General buckets where we want to focus on leadership theories, leadership practices, or what we call healthy leadership habits, as well as the facilitation techniques. And what we found across the board is many people, maybe most people, who are charged with and responsible for the leadership training and development of others either do not have a theoretical or educational background in leadership. They do not practice healthy leadership habits themselves because of a lack of exploration and personal development, or they don't have the facilitation skills, namely in experiential learning and reflective dialogue, which is so important for our participants to be able to internalize the leadership learning and then apply their leadership learning into their own practice. And so the certification program is designed to cover each of these 3 areas: theories, practices, and facilitation skills. In terms of the design, in this country, it's designed right now as a 5-day retreat. And the data from this session is about the 5-day immersion retreat, which is intended to provide a hands-on immersion experience for our participants. We have leadership theory and leadership practice deep dives, which are opportunities for our participants to see from the facilitators what a leadership training looks like that's connected to a theory or practice and utilizes experiential learning, because that is preparatory for them as they work towards their certification exam at the end of the 5-day retreat. We're also intentional with relationship building opportunities and providing plenty of space for reflection, purposeful pausing, and check-ins. We scale up the experience from day 1, from the introductions through the certification exam, to ensure that our participants are not just sitting back and watching trainings and presentations, but they are actually doing it utilizing our training story, curriculum, and model. And then just briefly, I'll share about the participants. Our participants for this study were 7 women from Greater New England who work in nonprofit organizations and universities, basically from Philadelphia up to Boston, Massachusetts. And they learned about the Leadership Trainer Certification Program through our social network, our professional network, as well as participating in a free workshop that was provided as a way to drum up some support and interest in the program. So let me toss it back to Cameron to talk a little bit more about the study and the outcomes.
Let me unmute myself. For our particular, how we gathered some data was really thinking about it from an assessment and an evaluation framework. And how we understood this is the assessment being the actual learning and assessing the learning taking place, and the evaluation being the actual programmatic evaluation of the program. So the the satisfaction with the week-long, the accommodations, the information that was shared. So for us, we thought about kind of thinking really rooted in a formative kind of evaluation, really getting at, are we meeting the outcomes of the program? Are we addressing the learning outcomes that we designed? Are we delivering what we said we're going to deliver, and are our participants walking away with what we promised them? Well, we asked for a pre-assessment and really getting at what do students know about leadership, right? So what are their, or not students, what our participants know about leadership? I'm thinking about my faculty row here. What do they understand about leadership? What do they want to learn about leadership? What theories kind of speak to them? And then we really wanted to do a follow-up, right? So, and to be able to compare, well, how do they define leadership before? How do they define it now? What theories and concepts are they more familiar with? What do they understand about facilitation through that post-assessment? With our particular one, we did 2 follow-up assessments. So we did one about right after the week-long immersion experience. We did a 6-month one as well. During the time, we asked for testimonial videos. So asking those students about the experience, or their participants, what were they learning? What were they experiencing during the time and making meaning of? And then we did a 1-year anniversary. It was a little over a year anniversary focus group. So it almost became a longitudinal study, right? So what ongoing learning is happening that can be tied back to the immersion experience for participants. We had multiple data points for the assessment and the evaluation. So we want to highlight kind of 3 key understandings, findings, takeaways that our particular participants gathered. So the first one is really defining, understanding leadership versus leader. So we really wanted them to bring their own understandings to the community in which they were learning in, but we wanted to John's point, offer them some foundational, conceptual, some literature to ground their understandings and tie those into. And the key highlight that participants really walked away with was they could name that their definition of leadership grew. There was growth in their understanding. So they didn't pinpoint leadership or leader as the same thing, right? So the leadership is really thinking about how do we enact the positive change in which we want to see, and the leader taking on the role to do that, no matter what realm of they were engaging, particularly with leadership. Participants, we have a almost 300-page curriculum that participants were able to take with them after the week. And the key concepts that really set with them in our 1-year focus group that they were still talking about was really about servant leadership, emotional intelligence, and we do a strong unit on mindfulness. And all the participants talked about how they try to take these concepts into their own practice, both personally and professionally, when thinking about facilitation and leadership. And then our final one was we spent a lot of time building community, and through that building community, participants were able to practice their facilitation and get constructive feedback. And they talked about this deeper understanding and connection of experiential activities to reflective dialogue. John highlighted earlier, that was one of our key learning outcomes that we wanted to achieve. And the participants really highlighted this, especially in the 1-year focus group follow-up, of thinking about the role of reflective dialogue in continuing to build your own leadership capacity, and also continuing to build your capacity to train others when thinking about leadership. So they felt like the week-long immersion did a good job of modeling what was reflective dialogue and how did it connect to making meaning with experiential activities. So we feel like there's some implications when we think about programs like ours, and even our program as we continue to build this, and it's really giving and that opportunities for building the capacity and confidence for facilitation. Many of the participants just talked about they didn't have the time, opportunity to engage with people like John and our other co-facilitator, Christine, to get feedback. They didn't have a space and opportunity to get feedback about their facilitation from their peers. And the community which was built offered a community of support. So they were willing to take chances, they were willing to grow in their own facilitation. And then I've highlighted this point just to stress it back to reflective dialogue as a part of the leadership learning process. And then finally, something we didn't name with our participants were a majority of them were women of color. A majority of the 7 were Latino women. And there were some cultural and social identities that they immediately connected to their leadership and leadership learning. And one of our outcomes that we feel is that our curriculum has to be rooted in making these connections so leadership can be applied in a more culturally relevant way for learning leadership. So I know we sped through that, but we were short on time, and we're more than happy to answer any questions at the end for any follow-up. And John's also dropped in the chat our actual website to the leadership training program and the Leader nonprofit organization. Thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Very efficient people. Wow. All right. We have one final presentation. This is Self-Leadership on the Edge in a Complex and Uncertain Environment. This is presented by Andrew H. Campbell. Andrew, take it away.
Okay, I'm going to actually take this a little bit further. You guys have, the presentations that has gone on so far, see if I can't get this. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, let me put it to you this way here in presentation mode. There. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. The presentations that has gone on so far has been more of the leadership education and some of the programmatics, and I've really enjoyed some of those. But this is going to be more of applicational. More of looking at, because we live in a world right now that's rapidly changing, and it's spawned a lot through the geopolitical and socioeconomic change that's been going on from the the technological innovation driven by, economic inequality and ideological discourse. So, in fact, the interconnectedness of globalization and technological innovation has changed the organizational and operational environment, and I think everybody can agree with that. The world has become more volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous within those environments. And the biggest challenge that we have as leaders now is not only how to lead, but not only to lead in an unpredictable environment, but also to navigate an organization when experiencing unanticipated events. As a result, like the national and business leaders now, is like, how do we lead in uncharted waters? And we've been dealing with that now with the COVID. And we're finding out that some of the traditional leadership approaches need to be changed and adapted to this new environment. So what we're going to be talking a little bit about is, what is VUCA? I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that term. It's called, it's the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environments. It was developed by the U.S. Army strategic, at the War College after the fall of the Soviet Union. There was a lot of complexity. There was a lot of ambiguousness about what is our function now for the military. And we found out that a lot of this is done because of the environment was changing rapidly, so quickly. And now corporations are finding out that some of that is transferable. They're dealing with the same thing, and has been for the last few years, and it's become more into the forefront. And this has been something that leaders are really struggling with, is how to be able to change and how to be able to lead in an environment that is so complex and so ambiguous, that everything is changing so quickly. By the time that we develop our strategic plans and put them into implementation, the operational environment has changed. So it's like, how do we change, and how do we look at that, and how do we deal with that? We're also going to look a little bit about leading oneself in that type of an environment, a little bit about the change in leadership development from yesterday to today. I'm going to talk a little bit about emotional intelligence and the framework that has been presented, that I developed and sent to Daniel Goldman. He's going to be putting it into his next book that he's been doing. And also meta leadership framework from the Harvard National Preparedness Institute. And I also developed a strategic leadership in a VUCA environment, going about how do we deal with those, what are those skill sets, and how do we look at it strategically. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And so a little bit about the discussions. Has anybody ever heard of the VUCA? Just say yes, no, yes, okay. VUCA is, as far as it's the effective leadership is the ability to contain and manage organizational, uncertainty, chaos, and volatility in the organizations that we operate in. Volatility is usually, just as a quick discussion, if you look at this, you're looking at the volatility on one side and the uncertainty and the complexity and ambiguity on one side that we're dealing with. How do you deal with that? And so what's been presented is more of if you have a volatile situation, if you have a good vision corporately, then people will be able to identify and to be able to handle that volatility. So I'm trying to show the parallel between, if you have an uncertain environment, you've got the understanding. And I can give you definitions, but because of that, we don't have enough time within that. So I'm just going to give you a very high level, the complexity. If you have clarity within that vision and clarity within that understanding, then you can be able to handle those in crisis situations that is very ambiguous, and to be able to, because when you have the ambiguity, then you got to be able to adapt. And then within those, grounded within the theories, is you got the change leadership and the chaos leadership and adaptive. And so that is a real quick down and dirty background, and we can ask, and you guys can talk, ask me questions more about that as far as how they parallel. Okay, so when you're doing some of your leadership training and some of your leadership education, this is something that you might want to think about incorporating, that is very realistic, that people are really dealing with in their organizations. Leadership development that has changed. If you look at this yesterday comparative to what it is for today, looking at, whereas in yesterday it was very command and control centric, it was very data driven, it was very it was skill sets and execution type of emphasis. That's what a lot of our theories have been based upon. Okay, in the transformational and the transactional, the contingency theories and stuff like that. But for today, it's more of not so much the command and control, but connecting and collaborating. More of looking at the agile teams. Okay, so in the VUCA environment, this is that's what's being needed. A change of mindset is of, the predictability. We like predictability. The thing is that people now got to be people, and I say this cheek in hand, people have now, leaders have now got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, comfortable about making decisions that they have little information about. The information changes from day to day or hour to hour, literally. And that's, we can go into I can give you examples on the COVID. Is a perfect example. I worked as a senior consultant with the State Department, dealing with some of the COVID stuff at the end. And by the time that we would really make policy, the whole situation would change, and we would have to make whole new policy, and which made us look like we were lying, or made us look like we didn't know what we were talking about. The thing is that things changed so rapidly. And so that's a perfect example about how things have changed, and the leadership and how we lead has to change along with that. So what is self-leadership? Okay, it's about leading yourself. It's hard to lead others if you can't lead yourself. And so the thing is being able to lead yourself and be able to choose. It's knowing who you are. You know, who are you as a leader? What do you do, and why do you do it? In fact, you know, Simon Sinek states, you know, why are you doing what you're doing, and how are you doing it, and why are you doing it that way? You know, who are you as a leader to be able to make those choices? You know, things do not always come easily because of that, because things change so rapidly. So you're leading and managing others, you know, or leading and managing ourselves reflects on how successful we are at leading others, which is what I was basically saying, is if you can't lead yourself, how can you lead others? Because the things that when you're leading yourself, it doesn't depend upon how much you know. It depends upon who you are. And so, you know, it's not something that you don't get self leadership and leading yourself. It's not about leading others. It's about leading yourself, and those skill sets and those managings that you have, the emotional intelligence. And again, I wish I could go into more detail about that. This here is a kind of a new way. I was writing a book on peace leadership, and I was sitting in Village Inn one time trying to figure out how to explain emotional intelligence and self leadership and leading self and leading the community. So what I did was, this was off of, like, you know, the normal thing that everybody does when they develop something. They got it through off of a you know, they draw it out on a napkin and then let it set for a couple of days and then go, what the heck? You know, what this is I'm basically going to follow just the leading oneself and leading others. Leading self, it comes through the self-awareness and leading and self-regulation. Now, how do you do that? Okay, we talk about it. It's written, you know, Daniel Goleman talks about it all the time. It's in all of our literatures, but it's more of like, how do you connect the dots? So what I did was I used mindfulness and neuroscience to do the mindfulness for the self-regulation, to be able to regulate your self-control, to, you know, the impulse control, and some of that, and the mind, and then the mindfulness for the self-control, and neuroscience for the to understand that you can change that neuroplasticity, that you can change that white space between the right brain and the left brain, and you can change those behaviors. But it takes work. And a lot of people, they want it, but they don't, and they know it, but they don't want to go into the work to change those behaviors. And that's what leadership development is basically is it's to be able to identify those skill traits, the soft skills, and how do you change that behavior? And that's what the leading oneself is. But the part of it is that what is it that you want to change? And what are you willing to change so you can lead others and be a better leader to them? And I could give you more, you know, the whole thing could be around this right here. So within that, so then it's like, okay, now that you've developed those skill sets and you're the centerpiece. Now it's like, okay, the meta leadership, it's more of where you can lead up, down, across, and then externally. Does that make any sense? So it's not just, and again, I could go into a whole section of this. I give a whole class on this, exactly just this with the Air Force Academy. I teach this here. And so the whole point of this is being able to developing your own skill sets so you can develop and lead up, because as a manager, you are in the center. You have people above you and below you, and then you've got to be able to externally to collaborate with people externally outside of the organization that's not in your teams or that's in your teams, and you got to be able to manage them externally. I don't know if that makes any sense.
2 minutes.
Okay, great, because this is the framework that I developed. And we could go into this a whole lot, but if you notice, there's a book out here on this. This is all out of my book. Out of the book. It's called Chaos is a Gift: Leading Oneself in Uncertain and Complex Environments. And it explains the basic skills, okay, in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment, the basic skills and the critical skills. And as you come down and you develop those skills, if you move from a basic to the critical skills, so you can have that vision, understanding, and clarity. So when you have that, then you develop, and then you develop your strategic plans, strategic thinking, and strategic foresight to be able to see outside of the those different pieces. And again, I wish I had more time to be able to explain it to you better, but this gives you a very basic, high level understanding. And I really encourage you, if you want to get more information, it talks about all of that, both in this book, both academically, in that type of an environment, business environment, and a organizational conflict environment and crisis environment. So those are the three pieces within that. And it's highly endorsed by Sherry, who's the president of ILA. So to your questions, I thank you for your time.
Wow. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Well, folks, and you can stop sharing now. Yeah. And people. So we have 5 minutes left for any Q&A. Andrew, you can stop sharing your screen.
I'm trying to. I'm trying to, believe me.
You know, this is my first ILA, and this is the first session that I truly want. I wanted twice as much time for these 4 presentations and interaction, because every single one of them were excellent. So thank you, folks, for that. Folks, if you want to just shout out questions, comments, whatever, go for it. Mark Hill, I know you mentioned that you hadn't even thought about leading yourself versus going the route of just looking at different styles of leadership, et cetera. But whatever comments you have, folks, questions, go for it.
I have a question for the Prometheus Project folks. I found your 4 archetypal situations really interesting around in a crisis versus a highly creative, and how the practical side of that, how does leadership change from those 4 archetypes? Can you share the other 2 archetypes? You talked about in a crisis, highly creative, and then I was curious about the others, or if there's a place I can go find the information.
Operational and change. So the idea being, in a crisis, you have certain goals you want to achieve there. In an innovation, you are trying to create something new. Once you've created that something new, then you may want to lead that change and scale that change. And operationally is really the continuous improvement story and leading continuous improvement, self-empowered teams, and that type of thing is a different leadership cadence. And it's not that those are the only, but those are kind of the patterns that we think cover typically what you find in an organization. So we grouped them that way.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else, folks? And by the way, make sure, folks, you put your information in the chat if you can, how you can be reached, because plenty of folks want to reach out to you. Other folks. I love the neuroscience. A number of you, you connected right away to the neuroscience aspects, the emotional intelligence, the neurosocial science aspect of leadership, the human aspect, which is it's key. And wow, yeah, so you're doing the right stuff, in my opinion, of course.
I had a question for those, if no one else has a question for Jonathan, Kroll, and Cameron. I'm curious, you mentioned a certification exam. One of the things that we find challenging is really ensuring people have learned without pressuring that they learned a very specific way, because we all define our leadership practice a certain way, right? And so I'm just curious, could you expand a little bit on that certification exam?
Yeah, so it's essentially a facilitated training that our participants run the rest of us through. And for us, the assessment is about how well they're able to connect a theory or practice, whatever they choose, to experiential learning activity, as well as hosting a reflective dialogue to pull out our learning as participants, to have a clear opening and a clear conclusion. And based on the number of participants, it's a 30-minute block. And so we're not talking about like a half-day retreat or even an hour-long conference session. But it's for us to ensure they have the foundational building blocks to build from when they are hosting their leadership trainings outside of the certification program. And as I said very briefly, we utilize what we call and created is the training story model. And so we utilize the arc of a narrative with an exposition and a rising action and an apex and a falling action and a resolution as a way to frame 5 elements of a training: the opening, the message or the theme of the training, experiential learning activities as the apex, reflective dialogue as the falling action, and then the conclusion, the resolution, is wrapping it all together.
Wow. Awesome. Awesome. Kimberly, did you published your company, is it Lippert or Lippert?
Lippert.
Lippert, yes, the Lippert Academy, Leadership Academy. And you published the how-to aspect of implementing the leadership. And how are you sharing that with other organizations and other, yes?
Yeah, so actually, if you were to, we have a lot of competitors and customers who have said, what did you do? Why is it working? Why is this, like, we have people that have actually chosen to come back to work at Lippert when they had left because it was so bad. And so they're like, what has happened now? And we want that. And so we've actually have that external facing arm, the Lippert Academy, which in that academy, if you opt into that, we've got a lot of internal resources that we share and offer and show them, here are the X's and O's. We can help build you a 360-degree feedback tool aligned specifically to your core values and leader qualities or your mission. And what are all those detailed of, like, what does it actually mean to have a positive attitude? Like, let's define that and measure it. And so that playbook, if you will, we use a lot of sports analogies in this company. That playbook is something that can be used if you engage in the contract
Awesome.
with Lippert. It's pretty neat, actually, to see other people have their own core value and leader quality cards, or just mission statements in their own version of them. It's right, raising, what is it? Rising tide raises all ships, right?
Yeah.
And we want our industry to be better.
There
So yes, the answer is yes.
All right, thank you. All right, folks, thank you for being here. Presenters, again, thank you so much. You were great. I appreciate it. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the conference. See you around. Bye now.